Hello and welcome to the Municipal 2022 Overview Budget, Our Community, Our Future. I'm Brock McGregor, Ward 6 Councillor and the Budget Chair, and I'm joined by Mayor Darren Caniff. We'll be providing an overview of the proposal for 2022.
Thank you, Brock, and thank you, residents, for tuning in. In 2021, Council provided staff with direction for the 2022 budget, which included inflationary increase plus an increase for infrastructure spending.
Staff came back with the current proposed budget with an increase of 4.74%. 4.41% of the increase is attributed to inflation, 1.56% to an increase in infrastructure spending. Savings were found to bring the overall increase down to 4.74%.
To put that in perspective, if we had zero inflation this year and we decided not to put any more additional money into capital, we'd have a 1.2% tax reduction this year.
Gord Quinton, Chatham-Kent's Chief Financial Officer, gave a presentation to Council last December on the impact of inflation. If you would like to watch the presentation, it can be found on the Let's Talk Chatham-Kent budget page. With that, we'll go into some more detailed overview of our budget. The proposed budget is a starting point. Over the next several weeks, we'll be looking to the community for feedback. If you'd like to become involved, you can provide a deputation to the Budget Committee, and you can provide feedback online through Let's Talk Chatham-Kent.
We've all seen increases in items we buy on a daily basis. This is true for the municipality also. The cost of materials and services we purchase have increased significantly due to inflation.
We're all aware of the infrastructure challenges we face. Consistent with our approach in previous years, we've increased infrastructure spending, contributing 1.56% to the proposed increase. This spending includes continuing to replace aging infrastructure. This means maintaining the bridges, roads, and buildings our community relies on every day.
With Our Community, Our Future, there's increased resident care, Riverview Gardens long-term care, moving towards 4 hours of care. Assessment growth is included in this number, which helps offset the costs. We also are planning for the future community and facility needs, and community policing outreach and funding the mandated enhanced 911 project, which will allow dispatchers to automatically identify the caller's location.
Despite the impact of inflation on expenses, we've been able to maintain existing services while finding savings to reduce the budget impact by 0.81%. Along with those savings, it's proposed that we increase funding for our winter control budget and address funding changes in childcare and early years. We've also received increased funding through the Ontario Infrastructure Fund that will help offset some of our costs. The proposed budget is a starting point. Over the next several weeks, we'll be looking to the community for feedback. If you'd like to become involved, you can provide a deputation to the Budget Committee, and you can provide feedback online through Let's Talk Chatham-Kent. The budget process is an important one. It reinforces our priorities over the coming year. Our community has faced a number of challenges, and we know that a responsible, balanced approach to this year's budget will set us up for success in the coming years. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Just want to start by welcoming everyone who's joining us online today. Thank you for being part of this process. I know that Council and the Budget Committee really appreciate all the feedback we receive, and it really makes a difference in the decisions we make at the end of the day. I want to thank all the staff members that are on tonight and available to answer your questions. This is our last online open house, so you do have some other opportunities to provide feedback to Council. You can go to Let's Talk CK, provide that feedback online. You can provide a deputation prior to the Budget Committee deliberations. So you just provide those in advance and they're read at the beginning of the meeting. Or you can go old school and pick up the phone, call your councillor, or send an email and we'll review that feedback as well. So we'll get started for this evening. If you have any questions, post them in the comment section. We do have some pre-provided questions from the last event as well, and some that were submitted in between events. So with that, thanks for participating, and please provide your comments.
Thank you, Brock. I will be the moderator this evening, and thank you to those that are watching. As Brock mentioned, please enter your questions in the comments section. And as he mentioned, we did receive some questions before tonight. Some of those questions were answered at yesterday's event, and we would really love to be able to answer your questions in real time. However, if we don't get a lot of questions, we will resort back to those pre-submitted questions. So, as we wait for people to provide us some questions, our first question is going to be for Gord. So I'll bring Gord into the conversation. Gord, my taxes seem high. How do they compare to other provinces or other communities in the province, and why do you keep increasing them?
Thank you, Amy, and thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. My name is Gord Quinton. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the municipality, and we do what's called a BMA study each year to compare where we're at compared to everyone else in the province. But I think the most important thing to remember is as you go down any residential street in any municipality across the province, the majority of the services are the same everywhere. So for an average household, you will find that taxes are pretty lumped together in the same small range. They really don't differ that much municipality to municipality because we all have snow plows and road work and drainage systems and street lights and sidewalks and all the amenities that we have, all libraries and arenas and such. So when we compare to our comparators across the province, we find that we're slightly below average, but in that same ballpark of between $3,200 and $3,600 for an average residential property. And so on the screen now we have, this is from the BMA study, sort of where we fit in. I guess the other part of the question is why do you keep on increasing them? Two main reasons, and there could be a third. There's always, sometimes our request for increased levels of service, so that would be something new added to fund. But for the most part, this year's budget is predominantly two reasons: inflation and catching up on our funding for infrastructure and getting it to a state where we can actually maintain and improve our present infrastructure. So we came into Chatham-Kent with almost no funding for infrastructure 20 years ago. We've been moving that up over time, but we're still only approximately 50% funded on what we actually need to keep and maintain our infrastructure. So that's why you'll find that some roads are not in perfect condition. Pothole, some roads might look past beyond when they should be resurfaced. We just can't keep up, and by letting it go any further, it just will eventually get them to a place where they're really get into a really depleted state. So we need funding for our infrastructure. And then when inflation, same as your household, we have faced tremendous inflation this past year and a half. CPI in December, national CPI was 4.8%. We're experiencing that in our local costs as well because we buy everything local as well, and those are the costs that we're facing. Some of the highlights, I guess, this year. Insurance, we're facing 30 to 40% increases in insurance rates, and I guess the second one I can think of is actual infrastructure itself. So paving a kilometer of road, for example, that has gone up about 8% this year, and on average over the last 5 years has gone up 5.3%. We have only been funding between 1 or 2% inflation on our asset management plan over the last few years, and so we're falling more behind, and we just can't let that continue. And so those are the two main drivers in this year's budget.
Thank you, Gord. I'm going to be bringing Dawn in for this next question. So those watching, we're hoping that you're going to submit questions, but in the meantime, keeping with that same theme, what challenges are faced by Chatham-Kent that our neighbor cities don't face?
I can start, and then maybe Gord can add on. So I'd say the single largest challenge we have as a community is that we have a very large geography that requires infrastructure, roads and bridges and drainage systems and so on all across Chatham-Kent. But we have relatively few people to actually share the burden of those costs. A meaningful number for me is sort of our density of our population. Chatham-Kent has 43 people per square kilometer. Just to give you a comparison, the city of Windsor has 1,450 approximately. So many, many more people to share the same sort of infrastructure investments that are required. So that's a big challenge for us. I think everybody would agree that we wherever possible we don't want to raise taxes, but the sweet spot for us then is to try and draw more people to Chatham-Kent, encourage more people to be here, so that we have more people that can share the cost of the operations of our community. So the municipality is engaged in a very aggressive growth strategy to try and encourage more people to come here to invest in businesses and also to come here to work and also raise their families. So if we can get more people involved, then there's a good chance that we're going to be able to spread the cost of operations amongst many more thousands of people. And we have been showing some success in that area. The last census that was done in 2016, it was reported that Chatham-Kent had approximately 101,000 people. The census numbers for the 2020 census will be released in a few weeks, and we're expecting it's going to be over 106,000 people. So, that's a big change to actually, from a community that was going down in population, to turn that around and actually have 5,000 more. But that's 5,000 more people that can help share the cost of our operations. Gord, you'd like to add?
Yeah, just a little bit more. You see on the screen right now some of the examples, and I just want you to think of a similar one-site city, St. Thomas, for example, or where you have the population all in one geographic area. Yes, you might have arenas on the north side of town and on the south side of town, or libraries, but it's all in one geographic area where ours are spread out through a large geographic area. Some of them are used at high frequency. Some of those are not. Some of those facilities are not, just because of the population in those areas. But we need to pay for those services in all those locations. And I guess the other part I'll highlight on this is just back with the drainage system, with our 4,800 kilometers of drains that we have in Chatham-Kent, which is an enormous amount. Because we have drains, we have an enormous amount of bridges. So where we have 0.7% of the Ontario population, we have 5% of Ontario's bridges in Chatham-Kent, and that's 90% of those costs are borne by the local property taxpayer. And so that's what makes us a little bit different than some other municipalities across Ontario.
Thanks, Gord. This next question is going to be for you as well. I see hundreds of new houses and apartment buildings being built. Why do you need more money if they're all paying taxes?
Thank you for the question. It's a great question. That's we're so glad to see all the development happening. We've had the highest development that we've had in years in Chatham-Kent. And so maybe after myself, maybe Bruce can add some more commentary on how well things are going. So a couple things. So it's great to see all those new houses, and it's great to see them all paying taxes, but it does increase the levels of services required as we gain population as well. So we do have whether it's emergency services or plowing the snow if it snowed tonight. There's just As you add more roads, there's more maintenance, there's just more things to look after, and it also puts pressure on our capital budget as maybe upgrades need to be done to roads leading to there, or a new stoplight needs to be put in. A good example of that was at Kyle and McNaughton last year. So we're very happy to have growth. One item that I just want to make sure people understand is that council did put out a great incentive to entice the apartment buildings that you see being built. And that was a tax benefit, deferring taxes with our community improvement plan for between 5 and 10 years, depending on the type of projects. So some of those new buildings that you see built, it was the incentive. They would have not been built because the economics were not there. We didn't have any apartments. That was one of the reasons why we had a housing crisis in Chatham-Kent, is that we had no apartment buildings being built. You'll see many in Chatham. There's been plans for one went to council in Blenheim recently. There is going to be a deferred tax benefit from that, but it is providing housing for people to live and work in Chatham-Kent. Bruce, perhaps you want to comment on how the building stats are going recently.
Sure, Gord. Bruce McAllister, General Manager of Community Development. So maybe just to provide some context for everyone, we just compiled our final building stats for 2021. In 2021, we had 390 residential permits that were issued for new housing starts. This actually accounts for just under 800 new residential units in the community, which includes 6 new apartment-style buildings that Gord was just referencing. There's been a number of others that have been recently approved or in the planning process that we'll see move forward here in 2022 and into 23. So relatively speaking, in 2020, we had about 270 new residential permits, which were issued for new housing starts, which accounted for about 430 new residential units. And that was a record year that we've seen in the history of Chatham-Kent, frankly. 2019, by comparison, we had 200 permits that were issued for new housing starts. So to give everybody an idea, in comparison, over the 10-year period between 2009 and 2018, we only averaged about 110 residential starts per year. So we've essentially, quadrupled our starts compared to those 10 years average in 2021. Certainly, we've seen a consistent uptake. It's been a little sporadic due to COVID, obviously, from a commercial perspective, but it's been steady, ironically, and same with industrial and agricultural starts. And institutional building development has been up as well. Obviously, we've had new schools, some new daycare facilities built in the last couple of years, with several new ones planned over the next few years as well. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Bruce. I'd actually like to keep you here. Thanks to those that are watching and submitting questions, and we will get to them. But I actually have one that kind of speaks to the new construction development in Chatham-Kent. A pre-submitted question is, someone asked is, why does Chatham-Kent need to hire additional 2 building inspectors? Because we do see that was an impact on the 2022 budget. So now might be a good time for you to address this, please, Bruce.
Thanks, Amy. So I just kind of provided the context, obviously, of the significant uptake we've seen in building activity with it, which I think speaks for itself. But I think it's important for everybody to understand that our building inspectors also serve a dual role as bylaw enforcement officers to in various bylaws that the municipality has put into place over the years, property standards, to name one example. And as a result of this surge in building activity, they certainly, our current team has been forced to spend more time meeting the demand of the building industry, leaving less time to deal with our bylaw enforcement issues. So they are prioritizing the ones that deal specifically, obviously, with immediate health and safety issues, but others, and we've had to prioritize to deal with other issues. That, coupled with a report came to council in December identifying that our growth forecasts that we previously released a couple years ago, we revisited those just based on the demand we're seeing. They're now predicting that building activity and housing demand is going to remain pretty high for the next, especially over the next 10 years. With that, to be able to keep up with the demand of our building industry and meet the requirements of what we're required to do under the Building Code Act, which is to deliver that service, there is the need and the ask for 2 additional building and bylaw inspectors. It's important to note, though, the costs and salaries of building inspectors are to be 100% covered by user fees or through the use of what we call the building reserve. So it's a user pay type of arrangement. As I mentioned previously, though, 15% of our building inspectors' time is spent on bylaw enforcement. That role cannot be covered under user fees, so that piece needs to be covered through the general tax base. So this essentially equates to about $36,000 from the tax base to cover these 2 new positions.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm going to bring Gord back in. Question submitted by Corey is, considering our population density is significantly lower than some of our neighbor communities, how does our farmland taxation rate compare to our neighboring communities?
Hi, it's Gord speaking again. Thank you very much for the question. As you know, Chatham-Kent is prime agricultural land, some of the best land in Canada, very productive, and it's our #1 industry in Chatham-Kent. But as far as how our farmland taxation compares, total taxation, of course, is a combination of assessment values times the tax rate, and in the case of farmland, it also includes a what's called a tax ratio, which is a discount that all farms have in Ontario. The default of that discount is that a farm would pay 25% of what a residential house would pay in taxes. So of course, with having some of the most productive land in Ontario, we have some of the higher valued land in Ontario in that calculation. But our council, a couple decades ago now, I believe it was between 2004 and 2006 on 2 occasions, lowered that tax ratio from the max, which is the 25%, down to 22%. And that was because at the time, agricultural prices had plummeted. Corn, I remember, being in the $2.50 a bushel range. And it was quite a hard time for farming, as farm prices were also increasing drastically at that same time. So the council of the day lowered that tax ratio. Just have some stats for you. 87% of municipalities in Ontario have maintained the 25% tax ratio. Many of the ones that have lowered it, it's because of pockets of farmlands inside of cities that are really farmland waiting development. So when you get down to the county level around us, Elgin, Middlesex, and Essex have all maintained the 25% ratio. Lambton County eventually lowered their rate. It's at 22.6 for 2021. So 22.6%. And they basically did that in reaction to us slowing ours. Administration has recommended that as farming incomes have fully recovered from that depressed area in the early 2000s, prices have fully recovered, and there's a commodity boom going on in pricing right now. Administration has recommended to council that we return to the standard 25% ratio. To date, council has not approved that change, but we will be asking them again when we get to tax policy this spring to consider raising it back to the 25% standard. Thank you.
Thanks, Gord. And I'd like to thank our budget team that are watching with us and helping to answer some of our questions. You will see that they've gone ahead and answered a question for Tracy for us. So we're going to move on. Gord, I'm going to stay with you. And we have a question from Catherine. So again, this is talking in Bruce's area. How long is the incentive for companies to build here and not pay taxes? How long will that last for? Was the incentive worth it? If they aren't paying taxes for a number of years, we have to increase funding for services. And now we need 2 more building inspector bylaws. So I know Bruce had mentioned how the salaries for the enforcement officers will be covered by that, but could you maybe answer about how long the incentive is going to last for?
Yeah, so I definitely will start off on that, and Bruce, if you have anything to add, that'd be great. Initially, it was just for a 2-year period, so there will be a report coming back to council in, I believe, April, seeing where we want to go next with that. Like I said, in the case of multi-residential housing, apartment buildings, we just had the markets really provided no incentive to build an apartment building in Chatham-Kent for the last 3 decades. Anyone that wanted to build an apartment building would simply go to London or Windsor or somewhere else because they knew they only get paid by the rents that they receive by the renters, and they could get $200, $300, $400 more a month rent for the same cost of building an apartment building, whether you build it in London or Chatham-Kent. So they needed an incentive. The evidence over the last 3 decades proves that they needed the incentive to make it work. Ultimately, it's a council decision on how long that incentive needs to go on or whether it's needed, but we still know that we have a housing crisis in Chatham-Kent. Bruce, perhaps you could outline sort of the steps that will be the process that will be coming to council in the spring.
Yes, thanks, Gord. And maybe just to answer that question a little further. So it really depends on the type of development. It's dependent on how long the tax incentive is. So it's either a 5 or a 10-year, and that's based on defined types of development. And I think it's important to note that not all development is subject to the community improvement plan. As Gord mentioned, apartment buildings that have greater than 50 units qualify for the tax incentive. Anything that's defined as an affordable housing development applies. It would qualify for the tax incentive. Industrial development, it really depends on the level of investment. It could be either a 5 or a 10-year. So for instance, if it's over $5 million in investment, it could qualify for 10. If it's under 5 million, it would only qualify for 5. Certain types of commercial developments are limited to a max of 5 years. So those are the types of developments that are covered on the community improvement program. So it's just good practice for council to revisit those programs. They can alter the types of incentives that we're talking about, tax or other incentives in that program as well, such as the waiving of fees potentially depending on the type of development. There's also grants specifically for affordable housing units that are eligible as well. So it's really it's a decision to look at at what point in time do we feel we need to continue to incent that type of development? Is there need and demand in the community? If the answer is no, you probably need to scale back the level of incentive. It means the plan is worked. But that's kind of the way the community improvement plans work. Many municipalities use them for various reasons, across Ontario.
Thanks, Bruce. We have two additional questions about construction, but I'm going to give you a moment's break, and you as well, Gord, and going to bring April into the conversation for a question Deanna patiently asked a few minutes ago. Deanna's question is, our cultural services are continuing to crumble and in many cases have become an embarrassment. Are there plans to invest in our cultural services and make our municipally owned museums, gallery, and Tecumseh Parkway, for example, the economic drivers that they have the potential to be?
Thanks, Deanna, for that question. First, I'm sorry to hear that you feel that our cultural services are crumbling. I would say that certainly COVID and the pandemic have hit our art and culture world pretty significantly. Many of our programs, many of our services have been required to close and stop providing the services that we would like, the services that our community deserves, really over the last 2 years. I do know that our team is getting ready with many plans as we begin to come out of the pandemic. And, you know, we see COVID kind of that light at the end of the tunnel. Art and culture will be a significant part of really helping our community get back to the things we enjoy doing. And part of enjoying art, enjoying culture, going to the museum, going to the gallery, will all be things that you will see happening over 2022. So in terms of investing, I think, you know, we are going to begin doing some significant community consultation. Certainly our Heather Slater, our manager of arts and culture, has really worked really hard to bring the Chatham-Kent Arts and Culture Network together to have these conversations, to really look at what does the community want to see within our art and culture programs? What does that look like to them? And how we can begin to move forward with that. I would also like to say I'm very proud of our art and culture team. They, throughout the pandemic, were able to partner with other community groups, other municipal programs and services to continue to bring cultural programs either virtually or with partnering with our library for some curbside pickup to be able to continue those programs. So we take your feedback seriously, and we'll get that through to our team and hopefully provide some increased programs and services that we can all be proud of. So thank you.
Thank you, April. I'm going to bring Gord and Bruce back into the conversation. First question, do they pay no taxes? So this is about the development incentive program. Do they pay no taxes, or do they pay what the property was worth without the apartment?
Gord,
yes,
you want me to get that one?
yeah, they still pay the base taxes on the property, on the land value of the property. It's the addition, building the building, that council has waived the taxes, and as Bruce outlined, some of the there might be some other fees up front when the building's being constructed that council has waived as well. But they're still paying the base taxes on the property itself.
Thank you. Ken has a question submitted. How do you justify a 4.74% increase when Chatham-Kent is prepared to give a $1.5 million to developer to build his own 2-story 14 apartment building?
Thanks for the question, Amy. I think we'll bring April. I'll start off, but I believe it's about one of our housing properties. So I'll have April comment on it as well. I talked previously about a regular market rate apartment buildings, how none were being built in Chatham-Kent, and how council has provided an incentive for them. What you're referring to, I believe, in this building is about an affordable housing building, which has even lower rents. And April can explain how people qualify for that. But because of the even lower rents, through an RFP process, we looked for developers to bring ideas on with a subsidy involved in the construction up front. And I believe the property that you're referring to was one of those. So I'll have April talk more about our affordable housing builds.
Thanks, Gord. Thanks, Ken, for the question. And again, as Gord's indicated, if you're speaking of the development that we're thinking you are, then yes, Gord's correct as well, that this is one of our affordable housing builds. So every year, there are dollars in our municipality, as well as every municipality across the province, that are within the budget to build affordable housing builds. Some of those are smaller builds, just 1 or 2 units. Some of those are family homes. Some of those, as you indicate, are a 14 unit build. We receive funds both from the federal government, from the provincial government, and from the municipality in order to support affordable housing. And affordable housing really is one of the key priorities of our council, along with all other types of housing. So we need to make sure that our families in Chatham-Kent have an affordable place to live and that they can call home and be proud of. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but this is part of that program, part of the larger picture of the number of affordable builds that happen in our community every single year. And we would love to see more of those. We'd love to see developers come forward to look at building some more affordable housing units. Thanks.
Thanks, April. This next question is going to be for Gord. What past budget decisions are now impacting the 2022 budget?
Thanks for the question. So often, council does have to make hard decisions and has to look at the economy but don't want to be too critical of council here because they always have a very tough job in weighing the needs to run a municipality and the affordability of what people can pay. But one particular item, thanks for putting that up. One of the particular item that was back in 2013 was a council decision to cut $500,000 from the salt budget, from the winter control for the materials budget for salt, without reducing at all the level of service. And of course, we have minimum maintenance standards legislated of what levels of service we have to provide anyway. So basically, it created a hole in our budget where we were still spending the same amount for salt every year. In fact, it was going up by inflation every year, but we had a $500,000 shortfall. We've come back to council every year since then, pointing out that this is just creating a deficit every year. It doesn't make any sense. But we're still working away on that. And in this year's budget, we've added another $62,500 to again, try to close that gap. I think the other one, and maybe I can turn it over to Thomas to talk about a little bit more, but is on the inflation on infrastructure. And where the inflation has landed for the last 5 years in particularly, but even before then, compared to the level of inflation have put in the budgets in the past for infrastructure. So we're falling behind. We're again falling behind on our asset management plan, and Thomas can explain that better than I can.
Thank you, Gord. It's Thomas Kelly, General Manager of Infrastructure and Engineering Services. So back in 2017, and actually even before that, we conducted a really comprehensive analysis of all of the assets we have in Chatham-Kent. And an asset is anything really you can see. It's physical. It's our roads, our bridges, our buildings, our arenas, our cultural centers, all of those type of things. And we determined that at that time that we had 4.5 billion in assets. And in order to maintain those assets in a reasonable condition, that we needed $96 million per year set aside. At the time we had under 50 million, so we were less than 50%. As we talked about, we continued to add through council support 1% per year over the last few years, but unfortunately inflation on all of those type of assets has increased much higher. We just recently updated that study, and the $96 million went to $118 million. So right at this time, we're only 55% funded, and that's a significant issue for us. The rate of inflation, even though we were putting 1% aside per year in 18, 19, 20, and 21, that attributed to 4%, but inflation was running 5.3% a year. So we were trying to keep pace, but we just finished that study this year. In fact, every year we were falling behind about 4%. And what that means is that if we want to continue to maintain all of the assets we have, we're going to have to make some tough decisions in the future. Right now, for example, we often hear concerns about our roads. Our road budget is only 50% funded, which means we should be doing 10 roads and we're only able to do 5. And that's been our situation for quite some time. And it's definitely, you see in the budget that it's, if you add up infrastructure, including inflation and infrastructure, is close to 3% in the budget. And even then, we'll be falling behind again, unfortunately. So it's a big challenge for council, a big challenge for the community. Thank you.
Thomas, I'd like you to stay with us for a little bit. A pre-submitted question. The question is, I rely on public transportation to get to my job. Are there any decreases to service or improvements to public transit in this budget?
Thank you for the question. And yes, there is. So over the last couple of years, you may have been involved in the Driving Forward strategy that was headed up by Ian Clark. And we've really done, again, a very comprehensive study involving the members of the public to come up with a strategy to say, what is it we actually need to do with our transit? So in this budget, there are a number of items for council to consider. First of all, within Wallaceburg, we're looking at bringing a on-request system to Wallaceburg 7 days a week. So that means through an app, you'd be able to really say, I want to ride from this bus stop to this bus stop in Wallaceburg. And that's a completely new service that's never been available before. The other added service is within Chatham itself. That's another one where we're adding an on-request service for Chatham on Sunday. So that's an added service as well. But overall, we're trying to move people around much more efficiently, more environmentally friendly, and really driven by a lot of our economy and the employers who want people to come and work for them. So it's been a very good project. And through that, we are also looking at some fare increases. That's also in the budget. Overall, we've had an objective as agreed to by council to try to have the users of the transit system fund 25% of the service. And we're not there. So we're recommending on average a 1.6% increase across the board on fares. You'll see some fares go up. You're actually going to see one fare go down, and that's the accessible. Right now, accessible is at $3, and our proposal is to actually drop to $2.50 per ride. So our ultimate goal is to really, again, increase transit usage, hit that 25% funding mark, and also increase the usage of transit within the community to not only help people get around to get their basic needs, their groceries, but also to help those employers who desperately need employees to come and help them out with their services. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. And you also answered one of our follow-up questions about how the transit fees will be affected. So thank you for that. Going to continue with Gord. Another pre-submitted question. Other than property taxes, what other revenues does the Chatham-Kent get to offset the expenses?
Thank you very much for the question. So we do get funding from a lot of different sources. There you go. You found it already. Close to half our revenues are actually from just over half from property taxes and just below half from other sources of income, with the province being the next largest chunk at 34%. So that could be grants. In April's area, employment and social services, for example, we do the administration, but if there's checks to be paid to clients, it's the province picking up that portion, and the province does pick up a share of some of the administration costs. Similarly, Review Gardens and childcare, there's various subsidy programs in community and human services, and then we get some core funding from the province in what's called the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. We get approximately 20 million from the province for that. That's just applied against our base costs. And then from the province, we do get some infrastructure funding. Not a lot, but it's actually rising this year. So some good news in the budget, where this year we're going to get $10 million from the province to assist with infrastructure. Federal government's the next highest one, where we get our community building fund, what is formerly our federal gas tax funds. And then we do have our user fees, arena, ice rental fees, those types of dog tags, those types of user fees and licenses that round off our budget.
Thanks, Gord. I'm going to keep with you for a little bit. Next pre-submitted question was, where do my tax dollars go?
It's a great question, and when you walk out of your house and see the road in front of you, and look to the left, to the right, everything that you see that's not on private property is maintained by the municipality. So the biggest area, this might be pretty small for people to see on the screen, but I'm sure there'll be a link put in the chat of this chart. The biggest area is our infrastructure and engineering services. This is for our average house, by the way, and with $1,200 going to that area, that's our engineering, public works, parks and recreation facilities. Community human services area, $529. That's our childcare, public health, employment, social services, senior services, housing, culture, arts and culture, and our public library. And then on the right there, the two at the bottom are police services at $525, and our fire and emergency services, so including both the fire department and our land ambulance at $380. So that's sort of the customer-facing costs that we have. And then more behind the scenes, we have our mayor, CEO, and clerk and legal area, our customer service and human resources area, our finance budget and information technology area, and our community development area, which has our building department, planning, economic development, and community attraction and promotion. So, like I say, I would say about at least three quarters, 80% of that, those costs are those direct service things that people use every day. And then there's the support and administration behind to make everything work.
Thanks, Gord. A follow-up to that is, what does a 4.74% tax increase going to cost someone?
So on that average household, it's $142. We know on what, you know, we know there's some parts of our population on fixed income that $142 is a lot of money. We understand that, but I also can say in the history of Chatham-Kent, this is, this will sound weird, a pandemic, but as we come out of the pandemic in 2022, this is one of the best economic conditions that we've had in Chatham-Kent since its beginning. You know, I've been in there. I've worked from Chatham-Kent from the very beginning as well. I've been through the recessions of 2008 to 2010, and you know, it really took to 2015 to even recover from that. Whether it's what we've already talked about, our construction and building starts, but just the general economy, the agricultural economy, and in general, things are going pretty well in Chatham-Kent, and we're pretty well at full employment. Our plants can't find workers, and it is, and we really need to. We're really worried about our infrastructure, and you know, heading into a very terrible area if we don't look after it. And it's just going to cost way more in the future, you know, as we're seeing this high inflation as well. Putting it off is just going to cost you double down the road, and we just can't put it off anymore.
Thanks, Gord. A great segue for another question from Corey. So I'm going to bring Thomas and Don possibly here to the conversation. So Corey's question is, are there considerations being made by the municipality of Chatham-Kent to divest some of the underutilized assets like rural back roads and bridges?
So I'll start. So the quick answer is yes. Every year we have brought forward to council a number of opportunities to take existing infrastructure and divest it. That's actually been a part of our asset management plan to try and narrow the gap in terms of how much money we need to invest every year and how much money is available currently through the taxpayer. That's probably one of the toughest discussions for council, to try and take away an asset that people have enjoyed the use of for years. Causes a lot of disruption to the community, and a lot of council members get a lot of calls to, you know, trying to convince them not to do that. But the quick answer is that we have continued to do that. We think it's an important part of the overall strategy. In addition to doing that, we have looked at divesting ourselves of buildings. So that's where we've made some starts where, as an example, the economic development building we used to occupy in Grand Avenue was sold to a private company and repurposed into an imaging clinic for x-rays and so on. But I think that there's more opportunities for that. But again, that becomes a very tough discussion between people that are using the asset and those that want to take it away. But we're going to keep knocking away at that. The other piece that I think I can lean into is we have been also working with not only our internal staff, but also more recently KPMG as an external consulting company to look at how we can modernize some of our services and be more efficient. Let Mr. Kelly talk about some of the examples they've used in engineering services to try and stretch our dollars, and not only divesting, but also using some innovative technologies to try and get the most out of our tax dollars investment. Thanks.
Thanks, Don. As far as, so there's a few things we can do. One is to bring proposals to council to look at reducing the level of assets that we have, and the other is that we can look at different ways of doing things, more efficient ways of doing things. And that's certainly what we tried to do. The infrastructure engineering team came forward with a report last year and listed all the things that we're working on. I can tell you that Chatham-Kent is extremely well respected within the province with some of our level of innovation. That new things we've tried in bridges and also roads. Just recently, this year, for the very first time, we implemented a hot in place process, and that is the first of its kind within Chatham-Kent. This is a sample that a machine that comes down, and what it does is it completely recycles the asphalt that is in place, rejuvenates it, and then puts it back on the road. So not only is it less expensive than the traditional hot mix that you see, but it's also much better for the environment. So we're always looking for ways to innovate. I think we've been really successful. Other examples would be, if you notice in all the arenas, we now have all LED lights across the board. If you notice all of our street lights, they've been converted from the HPS system to also LED. And by the way, that was a 4-year turnaround as far as return on investment. So these are all good things. As we learn and discover new things, we've been very aggressive to implement them. And we always take an approach that let's start off small. Let's look at a pilot project. And that's what we've done. Let's see how it turns out, because everything in our business is measured over time. So you need some time to see how it's going to behave with our climate, with all the winters we have, all of the ice that we have and the thaws and so on. So we take a project, make it very small, and then if it's successful, we expand the implementation of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. I'm going to be bringing Kathy back in. Julie's been very patiently waiting for me to ask her question, and there's actually quite a few questions in here, so I'll read it slowly so we can unpack it. Julie's question is, I would like to know if cuts can be made in-house with municipal employees. All of us have had to take cuts, so why can't employees there take some cuts back? For example, why do they need 18 sick days a year? And if you don't use them, you can accumulate them to like 300, which could leave you to retire early with over a year's pay. Could you imagine what would save if everyone went down to 7 to 10 and no more accumulating them? And stop the personal use of municipal vehicles. Also, does all municipal employees need cell phones? There's so many ways money can be saved.
Hi, I'm Kathy Hoffman, the General Manager of Corporate Services and the Chief Human Resources Officer. Julie, thank you for your question. Let me unpack them in the order that you've provided them. So your first question is about whether or not cuts can be made in-house with municipal employees. And the short answer to that is yes. The longer answer to that is just to explain to you what the process is that we take in order to examine these things. So there are a few different ways that this might come about. Predominantly, the first starting point is council sets our level of service. And as council sets the level of service, administration goes away and identifies what is required by way of staffing to provide and implement that service. If we change a level of service, administration does a re-examination to see if that has a corresponding change in staffing. And that change could involve something that decreases the level of staffing or increases the level of staffing. So that's one of the first ways. The other two methods that we follow, one is an internal formal process of what we call service reviews. So we routinely pick different departments and services in the organization on an annual basis, and we conduct service reviews on either a full division or it might be a very specific kind of service. And as we go through these service reviews, it's a very methodical approach done to examine how services are being provided, the delivery method of them, as well as the level of them. And we bring recommendations to council with regards to those services. And again, council makes decisions based on administration's recommendations. And from time to time, there are either staffing increases, a staffing status quo, or sometimes staffing reductions. The third method is a little bit more informal in some ways. It might not be quite as involved as as a formal service review, but an informal service review. Staff regularly identify efficiencies just because, of course, they're very close to the action and are able to comment to see ways that we can improve efficiencies. So we don't cut staff just for the sake of cutting staff. It really is married up with a logical approach to what is the service that we're providing. You may see in our budget this year, we actually have some reductions in staff. We have one full-time equivalent reduction in our economic development area and just over 3 full-time equivalent reductions in our public health area. The next part of your question talks about sick days. And just maybe to clarify, the municipality has a short-term sick plan and a long-term disability plan, and the first part of that is managed, self-managed and self-insured in those 18 days that you talk about, and the other one is through a benefit plan that is independent of administration. So important to note that the short-term sick plan for employees that accumulate sick time, our sick time is not vested, meaning that at the time of an employee's retirement, there is no cash value to that sick plan. So if an employee has 300 days in their bank, to use your example, at the time of retirement, they aren't eligible to cash that sick bank in and turn it into cash. We do have employees, of course, that are sick sometimes and require a sick bank, and we have a program and a process that monitors employee sick time very closely, and does for all of the good and right reasons. One, we want to make sure our employees are healthy, safe, and well, and returning to work in a healthy, safe, and well fashion. And also so we can make sure that we're monitoring in the event that there was any abuse of the sick time. The next question that you asked about was stopping the personal use of municipal vehicles. So we do have some employees in the organization who are required to travel to and from either their home or a location right near their home to a work site. And for some of those individuals, there is some minimal use of their vehicle for personal reasons, for small errands or things like that. And I think that on that subject, when I'm done, we might have one or two of my fellow EMT members that might like to speak to some specifics in their areas. And I'm thinking perhaps either Thomas or Chief Case may also want to comment on that. So we'll see whether or not they'd like to add any commentary when I'm finished. You've also mentioned the point about do all employees need to have municipal cell phones? And no, all municipal employees don't need to have cell phones, and most municipal employees do not have cell phones. We provide cell phones where we need employees to have cell phones for the purposes of effective and efficient operating. If we need to be in touch with people quickly, or if they need to be able to respond to issues, if they need them for safety reasons, whatever the case may be. But we also have a robust purchasing plan for our cell phones. And this is under Gord Quinton's area, our ITT department, and he may wish to add some comment to you on this. But in short, to say that there is economies of scale purchases that are made to make sure that we're getting very good dollar value for what we're purchasing by way of cell phones. And I believe that was the end of your list, Julie.
Kathy, Julie actually just reposted, and so she states that she personally knows people who have retired early with pay because of sick days. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it safe to say that perhaps somebody has been unwell and has had to rely on their sick bank in the hopes of getting well, and maybe it turns out that they can't and have then since decided to retire, and therefore it looks like they used up all their sick times as an early retirement?
Yes, that's entirely possible, Julie. We do have employees who are ill. They've been ill for a period of time, and they reach a point where they have come to a conclusion, or their treating physicians have come to a conclusion to say that they're not going to get better, and they make a decision to retire. So yes, that's entirely possible, but not the idea of sort of draining a sick bank to just to facilitate getting to retirement.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm going to actually bring in Chief Case and Thomas Kelly to provide any additional comments with the thought that employees are using municipal vehicles for personal use. Chief, you first, please.
Good evening, everyone, and good evening, Julie. Thank you for your question. I can think of one example. We have our assistant fire chiefs who are on call for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We always have at least one or two available, and if we should have a larger emergency, then we may need to bring further chiefs to the scene. They have some personal use of their response vehicles. They have lights and sirens and a radio, and they carry their bunker gear in there. And I would expect that if they're going about their business on a Saturday afternoon and a call comes in, they immediately respond to the call. That's more cost effective than having many officers who are available and on duty sat at the fire station. That would just be one example. But what I can assure you is that that is a very cost effective way of providing command cover for emergencies. And the chiefs in question pay quite significant taxable benefit on any personal use they use. So it does equate to quite a saving for the taxpayer by having a small number of chiefs who give their time to be able to respond to calls during any emergency, which could be day or night, weekend or weekday. I hope that answers one of your questions.
Thank you, Thomas. Over to Thomas, please.
Yeah, thank you. And really, the concept is very similar on my team. So anytime we have a winter storm, say a violent rainstorm, you have water issues, I have a team that is on call and ready to leap into action, basically. So we do a very cost-effective way, rather than paying them on call or putting them in the shop waiting for those calls. We let them go about their normal lives, and when the emergency is called, they're there, they're ready to go. It's a very similar concept to what our fire and emergency services use, and they do pay a taxable benefit on any personal use. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I'll now bring in Don to maybe start the conversation. This next question was pre-submitted. We're always hearing that the reserves are so healthy. Why not just use the funds in the reserve to cover the increase from inflation?
So most of the reserves that we have with the municipality are targeted for a specific purpose. So an easy example I can share with you is the 3rd Street Bridge. So, our large bridges in Chatham would typically, be in the range of $20 million to replace, as we're doing this year. It would be impractical to try and raise all of the money for that sort of huge capital project over the course of a few years. We typically are, we're looking at a bridge that would have a lifespan of 75 years with a major rehabilitation, and at the halfway point in its life, around 37 years. We have to save for several decades to get enough money to save that bridge. So our reserves are also an accumulation to prepare to pay for large capital projects. That's the major reason I can imagine that we would try and do that. The other piece is that when we're budgeting, we try, and council has done a great job over this, and I think with the support of administration, is you try and develop a pay-as-you-go strategy. A reserve is like a savings account. The budget that we're dealing with is dealing with day-to-day operations that occur every year, year over year. So let's just say that we decide that we need to increase the level of service for snow plowing or putting more gravel on our roads. If we were to try and rob a reserve to pay for that, that cost of the service goes year over year. Like, that's a recurring cost in every year's budget. If you're taking money out of that savings account or the reserve to pay for that, you're going to diminish the reserve. It'll be depleted, and the money will not be there when you have the large capital expense to deal with. So the idea of the operating budget is you pay as you go. Council has the difficult job of trying to establish a level of service, and then to determine, what's the budget that we can collect to pay for those levels of services. So that's sort of the big part of the budget process. But trying to use a reserve for either the intended purpose or if there's a special occasion. Now, I'll just give you an example. In the past year, we have spent probably close to $5 million in responding to a very unexpected situation, the gas leaks in Wheatley. That would be a type of an event that would not be expected to be a recurring event. And we might recommend to council that if we have a shortfall in the budget, which we're expected to, that we would access one of the, like a strategic reserve to pay for that. That's a level of resiliency or capacity that we need to maintain to deal with unexpected events. It could also be for something, more on the I'll say quality of life side rather than responding to an emergency. So let's say we want to replace one of our arenas, like the Memorial Arena. We've talked about replacing that. It doesn't owe the community a lot. It's over 70 years old. I think, in fact, if it's the oldest arena in the province or one of the oldest. If we were to look at replacing that, you might dip into a reserve for part of the monies to reduce the amount of debt that would be required. So that's sort of the general principle with reserves. Gord may wish to add some thoughts, but we try and do a pay-as-you-go with the budget for operating costs, use the reserves for those larger capital expenses that cost several years to expend, or some of those large quality of life type purchases like something investment in culture or recreation services that we might have from time to time.
Don, I'll just add, I think in the comments, do we have healthy reserves? And yeah, I do think we have healthy, adequate reserves now. But just that's after a lot of work over the last 2 decades. We had very unhealthy reserve levels, very inadequate reserve levels, as mandated at the amalgamation when we basically handed the reserves back to the residents in their individual communities as we came together. So we started at nothing, basically nothing. We had a very negative net financial position, which is not looked at well by the province, and we're finally to a place where we actually have adequate reserves for a municipality of our size and all the risks that we face.
Thank you for that. I'm going to bring Kathy Hoffman back in to the stream. So the pre-submitted question is, things are tough for families right now, and another increase in property taxes above inflation is really hard. Why are there staff increases in this budget?
Thank you for the question. As I talked about a couple of minutes ago in an answer I gave to Julie's question, the staffing increases are directly tied to changes in staffing levels. You heard a couple of people speak earlier in this chat. Bruce McAllister talked earlier about his need for building inspector bylaw enforcement officers. You see that on the slide that we have up for you right now, there are in excess of 29 full-time equivalents for our long-term care facility, Riverview Gardens. This is related to a provincial increase in 4 hours of care. And we also have the next position that you see up there, the manager of long-term care, is also at our Riverview Gardens site. It's a very large operation. It's certainly very, very intense, very labor intensive. And this is one of the other necessary positions to try to assist in managing the day-to-day operations. And certainly COVID has contributed to the need for having additional staff there. Without going through every single one of them, this gives you a little bit of explanation of changes that are part of our services right now. If you look on the right-hand side, you see 2 full-time equivalents for an electronic records management system. So we had a consultant that did an assessment and an analysis of our current records retention system. They do reviews on records governance, and we have been woefully behind in terms of how contemporized our current records management systems are. And so these are resources to go along with the recommended changes that assessment brought about. We also have the last item on, you'll see on the right-hand side, is the Human Resources Information System. We have, since the time of amalgamation, done very few updates from a technology perspective in our HR area, and we have slowly started to contemporize those ones as well. And there are a number of them that have become quite antiquated and are in desperate need of replacement to try and help provide better service to our supervisors in the field, on our managers, and ultimately to provide a better level of customer service. So from these particular positions, some of them, for example, the 29 positions in Riverview Gardens, those are funded from the province at a $2.3 million cost. Some of the positions that we have, we introduce them either as what we call a supplemental request to begin with, which means that they're a temporary ask until we can determine whether or not a new service that's being provided will require a long-term commitment or not, or a permanent commitment to a new staffing ad. Typically, if it's a supplemental request, we'll often find an alternate way than raising taxes to be able to fund those positions, such as maybe drawing one time from a reserve or from some other location. And then the balance of them are, if they're not supplemental, they would then be otherwise denoted as something that we call a base funded position, which then means that they are intended to be a permanent position in the budget, again, linked to a service. And for this particular budget, the tax impact is $678,000 for those positions.
Thank you, Kathy. I think maybe one more question before we call an end to this. I'm going to bring Dawn back into the conversation. Our final question is, does Chatham-Kent have a lot of debt? And if so, is it causing our property taxes to be high?
So Gord talked a few minutes ago about the financial position the municipality was in. I arrived in the municipality in 2009. 2010, we had $162 million of debt. I think that's the highest amount that we reached. We've been paying down that debt year over year. The only remaining debt now is we have, thank you very much for the slide. You can see that there's three major sources of debt. We've been trying to aggressively pay down the debt. The John D. Bradley Center was we had a donation of the property, and the municipality invested about $20 million. Riverview Gardens, that was a commitment that was made with the province when it was transformed from the hospital to a long-term care facility. And we have some relatively small amount of debt in our public housing. So we've been trying to pay that down. The benefit to the taxpayer, having that pay-as-you-go philosophy, we're not having to pay nearly as much money on the interest for any debt. So that's the benefit. So we believe it should be pay-as-you-go. And for the last several years, council has supported recommendations to try and do that. We do not want to see a situation where we're spending more money than we're able to afford. And one of the ways to do that is to live within your means and not take on debt unless it's absolutely necessary. I will share that there are certain times when the debt is recognized as a reasonable investment. Probably the best example of that, it is a common practice if you're doing a major infrastructure project for something like a water treatment plant to support maybe a larger increase in the population. That type of investment typically would be financed by a debenture, borrowing some money. It's like having a mortgage on your property or on the asset. But recognizing that asset would benefit a number of people over several years. And rather than just take money out of the reserves for that, it's taking the debenture and spreading that cost out over a number of years provides an opportunity for those that are benefiting from that new service to help contribute to the cost of it. So without getting any more details, we're doing everything we can to pay down the debt, and we'll try and continue to do that. And as you saw from the graph, by I believe it was 2035, there'll be no debt. Sorry, 2032. There'll be no debt. Some of those things like the Bradley Center, the mortgage, we're not in a position to pay off any faster. That's just in the terms of the mortgage. So, but we are doing what we can.
Thank you, Don. And thank you to our general managers for joining us this evening and answering the public's questions and the pre-submitted questions and helping our residents just learn a little bit more about the proposed budget for 2022. I'm going to bring back to our stream Brock McGregor, our audit chair.
Thanks. And I just want to thank everyone who was watching this evening and submitting questions. We really appreciate that feedback. If you still have some questions and are watching this in a recorded version, you can go to Chatham-Kent Let's Talk and submit some of those questions. You can also reach out to your council members via email or phone, or you can submit a deputation prior to the budget deliberations. And those deliberations will be starting next Wednesday night. Going next Wednesday and Thursday, and then if we need to, running into the following week as well. So just a reminder, this budget's a starting point, that 4.75%. The budget committee will work over the coming nights to review that budget and make some changes as we do most years, and eventually finalize something that sets the priorities for our community for the next year. So again, we appreciate all the input. Thank you to those who submitted questions, and thank you to those staff members that were available to answer those questions. We'll talk to everyone soon. Thanks.